Hello, friends. We're talking about homeowners associations today, or HOAs as they are called. They could also be condo associations or condo managements. But let's, for the sake of convenience, stick with HOAs. Anytime you have common facilities or common areas in a community that need to be maintained, there is a governing body like a homeowners association. They could be just volunteers from the community, homeowners, or it could be an external management company that gets paid to do this. It is a contingency of a purchase, so a seller is required to give the buyer these homeowners association documents at the time of purchase after you're under contract. So it's a pretty important contingency. A little boring to learn about this, in my opinion, but hey, since it's important, we'll talk about it today. Folks, this is Bella Vora. For those of you who don't know me, I talk about all things real estate, and we're talking HOAs today. So even new construction homes, this HOA thing happens even before the homes are constructed. The home isn't even built yet, the community hasn't even started yet, but you already have homeowners association documents for the community that a builder is required to give you, and every seller is required to give the new buyer as well subsequently. And the buyer has certain days under law to review these documents and make sure that they're okay with the community and the rules of the home homeowners associations that they're buying into. So my first-time buyers often asked me, what are we looking for? Bela, these are hundreds of pages sometimes. The documents, when they arrive, it's hundreds of pages. You could be scrolling forever. What are we looking for in these homeowners association documents? It never occurred to me, what am I looking for? And here's a brief update on what we're looking for. That's what I look for in the HOA documents. If you ask me, most of my buyers don't even read the stuff, but to some of them, it's really important. And, for some of you who don't know, maybe now it will be important. So the first thing we're looking for is what is covered. What's covered under the HOA? Is it a community pool, clubhouse, gym? Are there walking trails? Is there open fields? Is lawn mowing covered? Is snow removal covered? Is a golf club that's associated with the community, is that covered, or is it discounted membership? Are there any common storage facilities? So those are some of the things that you want to understand, what your HOA fee is allowing you as a part of this community. And of course, the fee is what you want to confirm as well. You already probably know the fee by the time of making the purchase, because by the time you're getting these documents, you're already under contract. So you sort of bought into, buying that home already, psychologically and, contractually. But it is a contingency of the purchase. So if you read something or if you learn something that does not sit well with you, you can back out and get your deposit back. So it's a very important part of, the home purchase and sale. So going back to what you're looking for, apart from, what is covered under the HOA, that is something we look for. Then we look for the numbers. I like to see the finances of the HOA. I want to make sure that the amount that they're collecting as fees is enough to meet the annual expenses. So are you covering snow removal, lawn care, or whatever? And so they have these financial statements that they give you for the last year, where they show you what the inflows are and what the outflows were, and you can see if there is a buffer that can be set aside as reserves, or if they're falling short every year, and then you know that there's a possibility that the fees are going to get higher next year, or there's going to be a special assessment. And I mentioned reserves. That is another thing I look for, because if there is any unexpected expenses, any unexpected big ticket expenses, it's good to have a little nest egg to, dive into. These HOAs the new HOAs don't have a whole lot of, reserves. So what they do is they try to do something called a capital contribution. Every new buyer that buys into the community pays a lump sum to buy into it. And that is one of the easiest things for the homeowners associations to do, because the person who's going to pay is not a part of that meeting yet. He's not allowed to vote on this yet, because he's going to be the new buyer. That's the easiest kind of fundraising the community does, because the current owners don't want to be paying more. And so the new guy, is required to pay a little more. So anyway, between capital contribution and the fees and what the inflows and the outflows are and what the reserves are, it gives you a little idea of the financial health of the company. It also gives you the insurance certificate, and HOAs require insurances as well. Another thing I look for clearly is the rules and regulations. These are very important. Some can be as important as, are you allowed to rent the property? If you're an investor looking to invest in the community, you need to know even before you put in the offer whether rentals are allowed in the community. So some of these, if they're very important to you, getting the documents is a little too late. Maybe this is something that you should have inquired about before we put in the offer. For people who have pets, they want a fence. Let's see if the fences are allowed. If you have a pool in your backyard, see if the sheds are allowed. Like, try taking that pool cover down to your basement every time, especially in the Northeast when you winterize the pool. So all these rules are good to know ahead of time, fences for your pets, or some HOAs even have these small rules about, like, I had a client who lived in a community where they would not allow bird feeders. Apparently, when the bird feeders were put out, the squirrels would climb up and create a racket, and the neighbors complained, and the rule was passed that there are not going to be any bird feeders. That upset her enough that she sold the townhome and bought a single-family home with a nice big backyard where she could enjoy her birds and watch them without any restrictions. I had a client who wanted a vegetable garden, and he was a single guy, but he bought a single-family home with, a bigger home with bedrooms and a nice big yard because he wanted a vegetable garden. And when we got the HOA rules, we learned that the garden's only allowed in the back of the property, not the sides or the front. And he was okay with that, and so, we continued. There may be rules about not leaving the Christmas lights out too long, or you can't paint the front door fuchsia pink if you want. So some people do not like all these restrictions. They're like, don't tell me what to do. I already did that in a rental for the landlord. Now this is my house. I own it. I want to be able to do whatever I want. So, hey, more power to you. It's good for you to know about all these rules and regulations and restrictions ahead of time. So if they don't appeal, maybe that's the neighborhood you want to avoid. For some of us who do business in, locations where we actually know the neighborhoods and happen to know about some of these rules and regulations, it helps to know ahead of time, what can and cannot be done. And so we kind of keep our clients away from those communities in the first place. So more about the rules and regulations, there would also be architectural requests in terms of, what do you need to do? What's the process to build a deck or to build a fence or to put in a swimming pool and things like that? What permissions do you need? And so it's good to know ahead of time. Another thing I look for is judgments and lawsuits. Now, this is kind of important, and it is very obvious when you get the documents. If the HOA is suing somebody, or if somebody is suing the HOA, if there are any lawsuits in progress or judgments against the Homeowners Association, or there wouldn't be judgments, but there could be lawsuits in motion. The lenders don't like to see that. There are certain lending standards where that could be a concern, and you might not get a loan as a result of that. So this is something to be aware of ahead of time. Usually, before we list a home for sale, and if there are such judgments, we have that conversation with the sellers and make sure that we disclose that. So I know of a community here where, for a certain short period, because the HOA was suing the builder for performance, no big lender would give a loan for that community. So the only place you could get a loan to buy into that community was from some local banks that gave, their own money, which, these loans were not sold in the secondary market. So they didn't have to meet those Fannie and Freddie guidelines. And so the prices in that community actually fell like crazy because the cash buyers came in. Cash became king in that community, and it was very, very restrictive to sell because, you couldn't get a loan. If you can't get a loan, you can't buy a house there. So these things are kind of, important. And it's not, one of the strange things about that community was that it was the HOA suing the builder. And you would think, since you are the plaintiff, it wouldn't be a problem with the lenders, but it was still a problem. I had another condo community where the builder was being sued. The HOA was being sued by a contractor who had done the work, and the builder and contractor were not, they were kind of fighting about the fees and what jobs that needed to be done for the fee, and the contractor was suing them. So it all depends on what the amounts are. If the lenders have a problem with that, something to keep in mind. Also, when we talked about those reserves, I want to bring up this example of the community. This is August 2021. We all heard about this horrific situation of the condo falling down in Florida. The whole building just collapsed. So when we talk about reserves and having the funds to be able to make the repairs or special, big ticket items, it's very important to have those reserves, because that community clearly didn't have the reserves. And there was some, back and forth between the homeowners, and there was no agreement in terms of what homeowners were willing to pay to get those repairs done and to get it in motion. And while all that debate was going on, unfortunately, so many people tragically died in that condo collapse. So maintaining properties, having some reserves, having a homeowners association who stays on top of these things is kind of important. Another thing is what we call something called a resale certificate. If there are any liens against the property, if there are any violations, if the HOA has said, like I recently had an HOA violation on a deal I was doing where there was a disc, an antenna, satellite dish on the front of the roof, and that was an HOA violation. The homeowners are not allowed to do that, and so it needed to be removed. And of course, the repairs, the holes had to be repaired in the roof, on the roof, and it was the seller who was responsible to get that stuff done. What happens if we don't review these things is, if the seller was responsible and if the buyer and their agent didn't pay attention to something like this, and they ended up buying the property, the buyer becomes responsible. You can't go back to the seller who sold the property and said, hey, now you come back and fix this, because these liens stay with the house. So whoever owns the house becomes responsible. So you can't say, I'm the new homeowner, I'm not responsible. So if the older homeowner, if the seller had not paid their dues, like maybe for an entire year or for the last 3 years, the seller hasn't paid their homeowners association dues, there's a lien against the property. And before they can get the proceeds of the sale, that lien has to be covered. Otherwise, the new buyer becomes responsible for those liens. So these homeowners association documents are kind of important to just recap. You're reading the rules and regulations. You're actually finding out what's covered under the HOA. You're looking at the finances, the inflows, outflows, and the reserves that the community has. You're looking to see if there are any liens, judgments, lawsuits. Your specific units, if there are any violations, if all the HOA fees are up to date and in order. And these are all the things that you're looking for when you get those homeowners association documents. So when my buyers tell me, Bela, what am I supposed to read in this? What am I supposed to review? Well, these are some of the things you review. Hope this was helpful. Every neighborhood is a little different. Some are governed by individual homeowners themselves, some by the management companies. The rules and regulations and restrictions differ. But, for the most part, these are some of the things you're looking for in your homeowners association documents when you get them at the time of purchasing a home. Hope this was helpful. Look out for my more helpful videos. Subscribe to my channel. See you soon.